welcome to this introduction to the planning scope module, one of the modules available through the updated version of Conservation by Design. Now, if you're listening to this presentation, my assumption is that you have a basic understanding of how we've updated Conservation by Design, what we mean by a module, and you also have watched the overview video that covers the resources available for facilitators looking to be trained in the planning scope module. So if either one of those things isn't true, if you don't have that basic understanding, if you don't have a sense of sort of the resources available for training in this module, please do check out those videos on Connect before going any further. Otherwise, you'll have some background context here that is missing. So what I plan on doing then in this brief introduction is to take you through the key steps in the planning scope module. But before doing so, I actually want to give you a little bit of a sense of sort of what this module is all about, and how you as facilitators can help teams kind of approach the module with the right sort of, or with useful mental models. So as we've looked to update Conservation by Design, and as teams are stepping into any of our modules, including the planning scope module, one of the challenges that we often encounter is that teams approach these steps with the idea that we're sort of looking to exactly predict and plan the future of the strategy through to eventually achieving our outcomes. And this can mean that when teams, enter into these spaces, they're having conversations, they can feel like a lot of pressure to get everything exactly right, to know all of the answers, to lay out that exact plan. And this can lead to over-resourcing the planning process. Now, the reality is that the actions we ultimately decide to take, in service of achieving our outcomes will be taken in a context within which we have very little control. And because that context is so uncertain and is so changing the world in which we're actually deploying our strategies, inevitably we are going to need to adaptively manage, because we need to learn things that mean that some of the great ideas we had out of the gate, we're going to need to be changed in order to accommodate the realities in the world. We're going to need to make lots of decisions throughout the lifespan of the strategy. Now, the reason that I mention this is as you think about stepping a team through the planning scope module, is that the same sort of mental model, same thought processes can absolutely touch down in this module. Teams can approach defining scope as with a mindset of like, if we do not get this right today, we have made decisions that will lock up the future of this strategy throughout the next 10, 20 years, whatever the lifespan of that strategy might be. In reality, what teams should be thinking is sort of, given what we know today, given the information we have today, what seem like the key elements of scope that we should consider. And then be open if new learning emerges, in the future, to changing those ideas, to bringing things in scope that may have been considered out of scope, or vice versa, So the idea here is that, for you as a facilitator, as you're taking the team through this module, really to help them think about, recognizing that they're essentially generating hypotheses, that with these decisions about scope, they're decisions based on the best available information today, but those decisions can be changed in the future. And that absolutely can kind of help sort of take the pressure off a little bit for the team, just making it clear to the team that, this is not something where you are exactly planning the future. You're just making some decisions in service of the efficacy of the team, in the near future. So given that sort of context, I should probably talk a little bit about what the strategy planning tool is all about. This is one of the modules that's a little different than the others in that it wasn't, one of the common steps in developing a strategy that was identified in the previous version of Conservation by Design 2.0, or is sort of common to other strategy planning resources like the conservation standards. In fact, this module, this tool, was developed based on sort of a specific ask from teams that were engaging with other modules, and sort of feedback from facilitators helping teams go through those modules. Because what was commonly happening was that teams might step into a situation analysis or a theory of change, and quickly either the team and or the facilitator would realize that there were some fundamental points of divergence around scope among those team members. And these are not sort of the typical decisions we need to make about scope as we actually go through the process of developing a strategy. These are the kinds of fundamental differences, like some team members thinking, that the strategy is confined to a small geography, others feeling that it's at a national scale. Some team members thinking that it is largely orientated towards, one metric of our 2030 goals, other team members, going in a very different direction. And where those sort of discrepancies existed, what would often happen is either the team would storm, so they would not be able to proceed with that, with advancing another step of the strategy, Or, and actually more often what would happen is that the team would sort of broaden their scope out to encompass those points of divergence. And typically that would result then in outputs from, situation analysis or strategy selection, theory of change that were so generic that the team themselves were like, these aren't useful. So what we have in the PlanningScope module then is a tool that is designed to help teams identify those key sort of elements of divergence in scope, if they exist. And where they do exist, to then have a facilitated conversation where they can make a decision about whether or not to consider those elements in scope or out of scope for the strategy, sort of for the time being. So the idea there is that the team does agree, they're asked to agree, on those decisions at the end of the tool, until there's evidence or there's learning that suggests that the team might want to revisit those decisions around scope. Now, as with all of our modules, we really only want teams to be using them if they're going to add value to that strategy planning purposes for that particular team. And so the PlanningScope module is absolutely not needed by every team. And so there are a number of sort of criteria that can help you sort of as a facilitator identify, is this tool going to be useful to the team? Now, the first is, where you have a team that sort of already knows that there are those major points in divergence in scope. So the team comes to the table saying, we've got some things we've got to resolve here. PlanningScope tool can be very useful in those circumstances. We actually encourage teams to use this tool before stepping into other modules. Another circumstance is where you've got a really nascent strategy, where the team really hasn't figured out what they want to do yet, and maybe the team hasn't fully coalesced yet. Going through this tool, even if the team actually finds that they sort of are in agreement around the elements of scope, going through the tool can actually really help the team kind of come together and have that sort of sense of cohesion that is so vital for success, overall. Can also be useful for teams that maybe have been working at one scale, but are working at different scales, or where multiple teams have been brought together to across scales. Those are circumstances where discussion around scope is often something that arises. You sort of hopefully kind of get the picture there of when this tool can be useful. But if you've got a mature team, they've been working on a given challenge for some period of time, then this tool is much less likely to be useful. One thing I would say is that, as a team steps through the tool, it's actually quite common for them to realize that there aren't major points in divergence in scope. And so, at the end of the tool, that can sometimes mean the team's like, well, what value have we gained from this? And I think it's important for you as facilitator to really emphasize to the team the power of these conversations. That, spending 2.5 hours really getting on the same page, having that opportunity, again, can be so critical to the success of the team. So what I'm going to do now then is to share with you the mural board that is the tool that you will be helping to walk the team through. And I'm going to quickly take you through the key steps that you will take the team through in using that mural board. Now, as a reminder, there is a facilitator's guide that accompanies the mural board. If you haven't looked at that resource already, I suggest to you at this point in time, take a quick look, take a quick read, and you'll see that the facilitator's guide provides detailed guidance for each of the steps that I'm going to take you through here in a moment. Another reminder here is that the teams themselves have a video that introduces them to this tool. So by the time you come together with the team, assuming you sent them the link to that video, they will actually already have an understanding of the steps in the tool. And most teams will have decided to undertake some pre-work, which will actually help to expedite the process of using the tool. And I'll talk about that pre-work as I after I've gone through the kind of key steps with you here in a moment. Okay. If you'll bear with me a moment, then let me go ahead and share my screen with you. So what you see now on the screen here is the mural board, and I appreciate it zoomed right out. You can't see any of the details. Now I will say up front that most teams decide to use the mural board to have the conversation, to capture the information that the decisions that they make along the way. But there are settings where using a digital media like this is just not an option or is not appropriate. In those circumstances, you can readily translate the steps in the mural board into lots of other different kind of formats. That might be a chalkboard or a whiteboard. It could be butcher's paper. It could be sticky notes. You can sort of feel free to be creative as a facilitator in deciding on sort of how best to support the team in going through the steps. Do encourage you though at the conclusion of those kind of in-person settings, if you're not using the mural board, to take that information and to transfer it into one of the templates so that the team themselves does have a digital record of those conversations. Okay. So the mural boards for all of our conservation by design modules, are arranged in a series of steps. The idea here is that you as a facilitator follow the guidance, follow these steps, you can have a lot of confidence that the team will, get to a useful output within the time available. And that is one tip that I can't sort of emphasize enough, which is when you first start to use these tools, really encourage you to stick to the tools as designed, to stick to the script as described in the facilitator's guide. Really will help you be successful. And where facilitators can often get in trouble is where they start to adjust, in the first few times they're using these tools without fully understanding why the steps are in the order they're in. And that can then result in the process not going smoothly and certainly not being completed within the time available. So my brief take home there is to trust the tool. Once you have experience under you, once you've used the tool a number of times, you may decide to make some adjusts to how you approach it. That's entirely appropriate. But to begin with, these tools have been tested with hundreds of staff. They work as designed. Really do encourage you to trust the tool. So looking across then at the mural board, I'm going to zoom in. And what you'll see on the far left here are a number of sort of, places where if the team hasn't watched that introductory video, you can cover some of the initial content, yeah? So there is a, step number one here is a chance for the team to connect with one another. Even if the team has watched a video, as you'll see in the facilitator's guide, we do encourage you to start off with the light icebreaker. We do encourage you to start off with making sure all of the team members know one another and they know who you are as facilitator. And then step number two there, describes sort of what the tool is for, the goal of the tool, and what is sort of out of scope for this tool. Now, one thing to emphasize here for you as a facilitator is that the purpose of the planning scope tool is not to define all of the elements of this team's strategy scope. Yeah. That is what you get to in your situation analysis as you step forward through other modules. The intent here is to really hone in on those elements that are most important and where there's divergence among team members. So really shouldn't be thinking about this as sort of a laundry list kind of exercise. And as you'll see in the facilitator's guide, and when we get into the more detailed guidance that I'll provide in my next video, there are ways that we really try and encourage team members, to have that mindset of selecting those few elements of scope that they think are going to be most important and where they suspect that there may be some points of divergence among team members. Below step number two here, you will see, a reference to our 2030 goals. As facilitator, we do encourage you to remind staff that, the ask of all of us is that we devote our available resources towards the work that is going to most meaningfully advance our 2030 goals. So we do try and have that reminder here in the tool. Now, that said, obviously, it is not, you don't need to be concerned if the team decides, that they're exploring a strategy that does not align with our 2030 goals. As facilitator, you don't need to be sort of feeling like you should say, oh, don't do that or nudge them in a different direction, but do reference that. So the meat of the tool then begins in step number 3. And this is where, the team members begin to put down on the mural board those key elements of scope that they think are most important and where they suspect there may be some points of divergence. And this is an individual brainstorming exercise. So as you'll see in the facilitator's guide, and we'll get into more in the detailed video, we have ways of encouraging team members not to duplicate the same content. But the idea here is that each team member is working independently. And we have 3 categories that can help team members kind of, more quickly populate this board. So that's really sort of, the generation there of content that you will then be working with through the subsequent steps in this tool. So in step number 4, then, what we ask each individual team member to do is to take, all of the ideas, all of those factors relating to scope that were created by the whole team, and to say, okay, I think this one's in scope. I'm not sure about this one, or I think this one is out of scope. So it's an individual sorting exercise in step number 4, which then provides the raw material for step number 5, where you're essentially saying, okay, let's zoom out now and look at the group. And where do we see those points of divergence? Where do we have factors where everybody's in agreement, it's in scope or it's out of scope, or there's and where do we have those remaining factors where we need to have a conversation, we need to make some decisions. And that then forms the basis of step number 6, where you have those facilitated conversations. You take each of those factors that you and the team have identified as potential points of divergence, and you have a structured conversation to say, okay, should we move this from we're not sure to in scope or to out of scope. And you'll see that here while we encourage team members to we encourage the team to make a decision here. We also sort of say if you're not really sure, generally lean towards keeping it in scope. That's sort of a safer bet. Okay. Now, one of sort of the important kind of co-benefits of having these conversations is that often what you'll find is the team members are saying, well, this is in scope, but it's not really key to our strategy. This is something that we're going to be wanting to keep an eye on, but it's not going to be the focus of actions taken by the Nature Conservancy. And so to help kind of capture those, those thoughts, for the benefit of the team going forward, we've created these what we call bullseye diagrams here. The top one is for what we call geographic scope. That's one of the categories of scope. Pretty straightforward. What are the outer bounds of the scope of this strategy? And essentially what you'll be doing as facilitator is as you listen to the team, you'll be saying, okay, this seems central to the scope of your strategy. We're going to put this in the middle of our bullseye diagram, as opposed to this seems like it's, something that's in scope, but it's pretty peripheral. We'll put it on the outside of the bullseye diagram. And then we have the same then down below for what we call our target-based and our thematic factors. So ways of kind of capturing that information. And then the last step, once you've had that facilitated conversation and you're looking to wrap, is to make sure the team leaves with a clear sense of where they're going next. How do they use the results of these conversations to actually continue moving forward as a team? And so in step 7 and step 8, again, with the guidance and the facilitator's guide, and we'll dig in deeper on this in the next video, there are templates for you to capture those next steps on behalf of the team to make sure that they leave with a clear sense of kind of how they're going to be using this information going forward. Now, the last thing I'll say in this introduction is I did mention that, there's pre-work that the team typically undertakes. We don't quite require it, but we strongly encourage the team members to undertake it. That is also referenced and covered in the introductory video that the team members will watch when you send that to them. And that pre-work is essentially populating step number 3, or at the very least coming in with some initial ideas about what the team members think those key factors are that might define the scope of the strategy, and whether, especially those where there might be points of divergence. So for you as a facilitator, in most cases, you will find that the team arrives, on the day of your experience going through the module, having, an understanding of the steps in the module, the purpose of the module based on the video they will have watched, and having, some ideas and potentially actually having pre-populated step number 3. And that will help save you about a half an hour of content and of time as you step them through the use of this module. This entire module takes about 2.5 hours. I encourage you to sort of try and make sure that you sign the teams up with that amount of time blocked. Teams will often be saying, oh, can we do this in an hour? Can we do it in an hour and a half? Puts a lot of pressure on you as a facilitator. And also, our general sense is if a team cannot carve out 2.5 hours to have a critical conversations about the scope of a strategy, they're often not well set up to actually enact that strategy in the first place. If that's sort of the level of resource limitation they have. So I do encourage you, in addition to sticking to the script, sticking to the tool, sticking to the facilitator's guide, really stick to the time allocation as well, so that you can set yourselves and the teams up for success. So before I wrap here, just a reminder that if you have a team ready to go, you're actually sort of getting ready to take them through this tool, I do encourage you to go ahead and then watch the next video in the series, where I will take a much deeper dive in some of these key steps. So each of these videos then builds upon one another. I won't provide the same introduction I have today. We'll be getting into each step and talking about some of the nuance and the things that you should be thinking about as a facilitator as you take the team through this step. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this video has been useful, and looking forward to connecting with you again in the future here.